jobs or schooling by protecting their employment and their academic status. Mr. Speaker, this province can boast that we have over 2,800 reservists, the highest per capita rate of reservists of any province in Canada. That fact is something that all Nova Scotians should take pride in, because we strongly support our armed forces and are recognized throughout Canada as leaders and innovators when it comes to military issues. We are, Mr. Speaker, the first province to have a ministry devoted to the military and to have an interdepartmental defence forum that is recognized by the principals and the leaders of the Defence Department and the armed forces as a model of how they would like to see other provinces embrace their military communities. Our province's Defence Forum, Mr. Speaker, has been in existence for almost 2 years and has already begun examining legislation or regulation that we as a government could enact to protect job security for our reservists living in Nova Scotia. Bill 80 is not, Mr. Speaker, the first time this issue has been discussed within the Defence Forum. In fact, Mr. Speaker, the Defence Forum has already entered into discussions with 36 Canadian Brigade Group headquarters here in Halifax to determine the most realistic and most efficient period of time which our public service can grant to reservists who are employed in government service. Mr. Speaker, this government supports Bill number 80. However, there are some issues that need to be examined, and with my honourable colleagues of the party opposite, hopefully have given some thought to. In the legislation that is presented to us, I read of enabling reservists to return their jobs after the missions. But, Mr. Speaker, have they consulted with business groups, the Provincial Chamber of Commerce, or trade associations which will be affected by this legislation? Mr. Speaker, I suggest it's imperative that we consult with those groups to ensure we bring forward the best possible legislation. As all would know, Mr. Speaker, in rural Nova Scotia, qualified and experienced workers are in high demand as tradespeople seek greater wealth in Western Canada, leaving Nova Scotia businesses which are endeavouring to retain their qualified workers and attract new employees to meet business expectations. Mr. Speaker, every member of this House can put themselves in the position of these small business operators and know the stress that they are facing. What would happen when an important staff member leaves for a year or more for reserve service, leaving without enough time to find suitably qualified replacement? Mr. Speaker, these folks will have to fill that void and will have to find new and untrained members to take their place. That means advertising a position which is temporary and investing in new staff members to bring the person to the level of knowledge of the reservist staff member who has vacated that position. In seeking qualified and professional workers, many employers would tell you that no person would accept a position that would take them just from 12 to 18 months and then only to end up without a job. Mr. Speaker, I am not saying we do not support the bill. As I said initially in the outset, we do support, and I support, Bill number 80. What I'm saying is that we need to consult with all those who will be affected by this legislation. We owe it to the business community of this province to exercise prudence as well as patriotism, as we owe it to our deployed reservists to do what we can to ensure that his or her place of employment is still in business and ready to accept the returning employees back into the workplace. Bill 80 can possibly be enacted within our public service, as we are big enough to support deployments. The government is seeking to include consultation with private sector business in Nova Scotia under Bill 80 and is looking forward to bringing this issue to the Law Amendments Committee. Mr. Speaker, Bill 80 addresses only the aspect regarding a reservist job. But I think one area that's been overlooked are that many reservists who are post-secondary students. As a government, we need to assure our reservists who volunteer to serve our country's armed forces that we need to protect these students financially and academically. When students deploy on overseas missions, many leave the university and college programs in which they are enrolled upon, Mr. Speaker. A student who withdraws from the course is in progress may receive a failing mark or withdrawal on his or her permanent academic record. This could easily hurt the future ambitions of the reservist beyond his or her present military mission. The other element, Mr. Speaker, is the financial cost of the reservist who has chosen between withdrawing from the academic program or declining a military mission which so desperately needs that soldier, that sailor, or that airman or airwoman. Most post-secondary institutions give a student 2 to 3 weeks to partially recover the cost of a course. But a student who seeks to serve his or her nation may not qualify for academic reimbursement. Mr. Speaker, our government does not feel that students should pay for their education and that they do not receive because they enter into temporary service in deployment of Canada's armed forces. While we believe that most, if not all, Nova Scotian academic institutions are forward-looking and reasonable and understand the reserve student's situation, we should entrench this safeguard in legislation, Mr. Speaker, and we will be recommending that from the government. Post-secondary education institutions should not penalize reserve students who accept to serve abroad with the military, Mr. Speaker. The government is seeking to include protection for students under Bill 80 and is looking forward to bringing this issue to the Law Amendments Committee. Mr. Speaker, the ways in which our military personnel protect our freedom and promote Canadian values abroad are not easy, and they are certainly not safe. More than 100 Canadians have lost their lives while serving as peacekeepers in various missions such as Cyprus, Egypt, Israel, Syria, just to mention a few. In Afghanistan, Mr. Speaker, Canada has lost 42 sons and daughters, 42 sisters and brothers, 42 neighbours in an effort to bring peace and stability to a volatile region and a country steeped in a history of bloodshed and a lack of human rights, especially for Afghan women. Mr. Speaker, our reservists are volunteers and can refuse any mission that is asked of them, but quite clearly have shown their commitment by volunteering to represent our country. The risk and the hardships that our reservists undergo to support our country's military deserve the support of the provincial government to allow them to serve abroad, with the knowledge that we in this legislature have done as much as we possibly can to minimize, if not eliminate, the uncertainty and stress about their jobs and schooling when they return back to their homeland. Mr. Speaker, I look forward to comments at law amendments and input from other Nova Scotians in regard to this very important bill, Bill number 80. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. The honourable member for Sackville-Cobequid.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and it gives me pleasure to rise today and speak on this bill, number 80. I think it's important that we all recognize, and I believe all members of this House recognize, the work that the military does on behalf of Nova Scotians and Canadians. I'm very, very proud to be a military brat, I guess, Mr. Speaker, where my father served the military for just shy of 35 years, Mr. Speaker, and actually was a member of one of the crews, the Athabascan, that actually went over during the first Gulf conflict, Mr. Speaker. So I have a very long history in my family of individuals and family members who have served, and I feel it a privilege to stand and support pieces of legislation like this that will enhance the military, I believe, in our province and show the recognition that they deserve, Mr. Speaker. As I said, a long family history. My grandmother actually was a war bride who came over many years ago with my mother, I believe on the Aquitarius through Pier 21, Mr. Speaker, where my grandfather was serving overseas. And as I said, it's been a long family history to support our troops, support the military, and I'll continue to do that. I'm also standing in support of this because of the presence we have now in the community I represent, Mr. Speaker. Sackville has a long history of being the home of many military personnel, Mr. Speaker. I moved out there in the early 70s, or my family moved me out there in the early 70s during the kind of the huge boom out there of many military families who were building new homes and put roots down in the community of Sackville, Mr. Speaker. But we also now currently, over the last couple of years, have a higher presence of military there, Mr. Speaker, and I'm speaking around the 30 military police unit, which is stationed out of Sackville now, Mr. Speaker. I had the privilege to attend the change of command just over a month ago. I believe it was on the 28th of October, and I know a member from Hammonds Plains Upper Sackville was there with me on the change of command for that unit, Mr. Speaker, and it was an important change. We had Major Mosier, who was actually from Waverley, who commanded the reserve unit out there for many years. Well, for a couple years in Sackville, but prior to that, I believe they were over in Shearwater, Mr. Speaker. And what they've done now, Mr. Speaker, they've created a new unit where it's a combination of the reserve force and the regular force. And now it's under the command of Major Cullum, who is a proud member of the military, proud member of commanding this unit, which is an integrated unit of reserve and regular forces, Mr. Speaker. And this unit actually has many members who have served overseas, served in Afghanistan and other areas of the world, Mr. Speaker, and are currently, I believe, 15 to 17 members are currently training to go to Afghanistan in February, I believe, Mr. Speaker. So I'm proud of the military presence in my community, not only as the military personnel to make Sackville a home, but for this 30 military police unit that has a presence and is continuing to grow as a unit, Mr. Speaker. They have over 200 members in the unit presently, both regular and reserve force. And I think it's important that we recognize both those identities, Mr. Speaker, especially our reserve force, because these men and women take it upon themselves to be involved in the military while they continue to hold employment in many fashions, Mr. Speaker. From in this unit, I know there's police officers, there's civil servants, I believe, who are amongst some of the reservists, Mr. Speaker. They come from all walks of life, and they feel compelled that they must serve their country and their province. And I think what we need to do as legislators is improve and support them to our fullest extent. I know that here in Nova Scotia, the member that was speaking previously mentioned there's well over 2,500 reservists, or maybe even over 2,800 here in this province, Mr. Speaker. And I know right now, currently, we have over 2,300 troops in Afghanistan, Canadian men and women who are serving there, Mr. Speaker, and actually over 300 of those are reservists from all over this country, Mr. Speaker. And I think it just shows the importance of a piece of legislation like this, that they need some protection. Protection around their employment, Mr. Speaker, when they choose to make that decision to serve our country, serve our province, and are stationed overseas, Mr. Speaker. I know the Minister of Justice mentioned a few concerns he has, Mr. Speaker, around the consulting with companies here in Nova Scotia around this piece of legislation, which I agree with. I think it's important that we educate all employers here in the province what this piece of legislation will entail and what the implications are, Mr. Speaker, because there are implications. But it's not something new, Mr. Speaker, to request an employer to give a leave of absence to an employer, Mr. Speaker. We have the parental leave that goes on currently when women are going through the pregnancy process, Mr. Speaker, and also around the adoption aspect of child care and child rearing, Mr. Speaker. So, currently we have in the province, federally across this country, the ability for individuals to have time off, to have that parental leave, Mr. Speaker, and that's well over a year in time length. So I think businesses already know that in the province that they might have times in their calendar year that their employer might need to leave, might need to have a leave of absence granted, Mr. Speaker. And, I think it's important that we recognize that. There's also many Nova Scotians who unfortunately have to take medical leave and are protected under legislation, Mr. Speaker. So the businesses in this province, I think, know, especially our strong history in military and those who serve in this province, and the possibility now of future shortages in employment. And I know the Minister Minister of Justice stated some concerns around the timeline and the ability for these employers to get a new person in that position. But many of our reservists, Mr. Speaker, they're not called upon to do a tour duty or go overseas in a short period of time. As I mentioned, some of the members of the 30 military unit in Sackville, Mr. Speaker, the military police unit, there's 15 to 17 of them training now for February, and they've known about that for I think pretty much well near 1 year, Mr. Speaker. So they've had a lot of time to give notice to their employers that they're going to partake in this important, important aspect of being a Canadian and being a Nova Scotian to serve the military under the reservists, Mr. Speaker. Personally, as an employer or employee of emergency medical care, and I know the member from Hants West would agree with me that that company actually has a policy in place now that was able to give me a leave of absence to come here and represent my community. But also in that policy, Mr. Speaker, they actually have in there around any paramedics in the province who might leave for a tour duty, as they stated in the policy, that they'll be able to do that, Mr. Speaker. So businesses now are recognizing the important role that reservists play in the military here in Nova Scotia and in the country, Mr. Speaker. And I think they'll definitely accept this piece of legislation going through and being approved, And I think any employer would be very proud to have an employee who represents their country and their province and their business, Mr. Speaker, in our Canadian military. So with those few words, Mr. Speaker, I look forward to this passing through the legislative process, Mr. Speaker, and hopefully that we can truly show our reservists the dedication and the support that they have from all members of this legislature, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Thank you. The honourable member for Kings West.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and certainly very pleased today to stand for a few moments and speak in support of this bill. I think it's one that I know is welcomed in my community. Greenwood, of course, having been established in the early 1940s, has, of course, impacted our area for 60-plus years. And so that very, very strong military presence and the role, of course, that reservists do play as well a little further down the valley in the community of Aldershot. And having lived in Kentville for a period of time and being very familiar with Aldershot and the very extensive area that Aldershot actually covers geographically, and the type and degree of training that goes on there for those who are in the reserves. And in fact, Aldershot does come under the base command at 14 Wing Greenwood. And in fact, just last weekend at the Kingston Legion banquet for Remembrance Day, the base commander spoke very strongly of the work that is going on with the reserves in Aldershot. And also we need to remember that they are made up of, of youth who have an interest, perhaps with a cadet background or just generally interested in the military, who join the reserves. We also have a very strong number in our area who have finished their 20 years or 25-year contract in the military, and the reserves, are an opportunity for them to continue along a career path that works very nicely for them and allows them to stay and eventually retire in the valley. One of the things that certainly that I have seen over the years is that especially with young people that join the reserves, it also becomes a stepping stone to join the regular force. They like the experience, and it becomes that opportunity for them to investigate joining. One of the things, of course, that this bill is really focusing on is that ability to be able to hold on to the job, whether it be part-time or full-time, if as a reservist they have to make a larger commitment to be away. And we've certainly had a number of reservists from the Greenwood and the Valley area that have now served in Afghanistan, and I know that we will continue to see that certainly for some time to come. In terms of being able to hold on to that job, there's no question the Valley community, the business community there is extremely supportive of military endeavors and military personnel, and so I'm sure that this bill will certainly kind of confirm for them what in fact they've been doing all along, and that is when the reservists need a week to go for training. They don't always have to take holidays to do this. There is support for this in our business community. So I think that this bill will help now make this a reality for the reservists, who we know make a tremendous contribution, that they are professionals in what they do. In just a few weeks' time, in fact, we will have 85 military personnel from the Valley who will be going to Afghanistan. They'll be departing from 14 Wing Greenwood roughly in about, I think, around December the 15th. This, as I said, is a piece of legislation that we support, and I think it's a strong piece in support of the role of the reservists, which at this time are getting close to about 2,500 in our province. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I will take my place.
Thank you. The Honourable Minister of Labour and Environment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And the government, as my colleague, the Minister in charge of military relations, referred to already, supports amendments that support our military. And I'm proud to stand here in particular because the bill touches upon reservists. And as the Honourable Member from Kings West stated, Aldershot Base is the largest reserve training base in the Atlantic provinces, Mr. Speaker. And it's an absolute gem in the Atlantic provinces. And the base has been very, very active in many different ways in training reservists across Nova Scotia, and as I said, is across the Maritimes and is a leading reserve base. Now, changes such as these are usually made, Mr. Speaker, in the context of the federal government, with the province implementing measures such as maternity leave and bereavement leaves and Labour Standards Code after they've consulted with employers and employees. And we haven't had that consultation, and we always like the consultation whenever we're able to have it. What we'll be proposing at law amendments, Mr. Speaker, is that regulatory requirements be added to this bill so that the program can be aligned with federal measures, because I understand, Mr. Speaker, that the federal government have proposed legislation that was proposed in 2004, and they've been looking at this issue. And so we propose that there be some regulatory requirements that would harmonize this with federal legislation if the federal legislation comes through. We also will be proposing that appropriate notice and time periods be given by the parties so that both employers and employees have time to make decisions and organize their affairs, which is only fair to the businesses that employ the reservists. And we're suggesting, Mr. Speaker, we will be suggesting 1 month's notice to employers, and at most military furloughs would be in the 24-month time frame. Having made these brief comments, I do want to commend the opposition leader on bringing forth this important bill that will benefit reservists across Nova Scotia. And as I said, Mr. Speaker, very proud to be the member in whose riding Aldershot base is the largest and one of the best training bases for reservists across Canada, Mr. Speaker. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The Honourable Member for Cole Harbour Eastern Passage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm glad to have a few minutes to speak on Bill number 80. And it's interesting because I think many of us in this House have military bases in our ridings. The member for Halifax Needham, the member for Kings West, the member for Kings North was just talking about the reservist base in his area. Obviously, there are some military stations in certain places as well. I have CFB Shearwater, 12-wing Shearwater in my area. And it's not very often in a provincial legislature we get a chance to speak on issues of military. And I commend the member for Cole Harbour, the leader of the opposition, for bringing this bill forward. It is a good idea, one that I think is necessary, particularly in this time in which the role of the reserves has changed historically. I think traditionally, at least between times of war, it has always been understood that the reserves are a reserve. But what we're now finding, and I noticed this last year with the American military and some of my work overseas, that it was amazing to see some of these military faces. Usually we think of people in the military as young, and it being a young person's activity. But I would see these men with gray hair in their 40s who were involved in military activity within the United States Army. And it sort of surprised me, because at first, when you don't think about it, you're a bit surprised to see older faces, people who you would normally think are past their career. But these, of course, are reservists. And I think in the United States, in their war in Iraq, they have had, I think it was upwards of 30 or 40% of the troops on the ground are actually reservists. A good number of them. And I think that, Mr. Speaker, is something that you're beginning to see as well in Canada. Not to that extent, not to the extent of that percentage, but you heard the member from Sackville-Cobequid talk about a reserve group of military police officers. I know people who are reservists who have certain skills, doctors, pharmacists, dentists, who are also being sent to Afghanistan because of the skills they have. And they're desperate for people who, frankly, have training outside, but who are willing to sign up as a reservist in order to be able to carry on certain work from time to time. And Mr. Speaker, this is all important, and that is why, with the changing role of the reserves within our military, the changing role of our military, Mr. Speaker, it's important that we reflect that in ensuring, much like we do with women who are pregnant, that people who join the reserves and are called upon to leave, that they have protection of certain benefits and their employment, and they have a job when they return. That is all very important, Mr. Speaker, and that's why I'm so happy to see this bill coming forward today, and from what I'm hearing in this House, most likely passing second reading and hopefully in this session today. We are hopeful that we'll be able to ensure that, that this bill will pass in this session. So, Mr. Speaker, I wanted to just say that it's important to reflect, as I said, in my riding with 12-wing Shearwater. I sometimes argue that I probably have the most militarized riding in Nova Scotia, given the percentage of people who are either active force, reserves, or are in some way employed either as civilians or who have family members or neighbors who are employed in the military, and having a base, obviously, in my riding. I'm very well aware also because of my having grown up in that community, my father having been in the military for 25 years or longer, maybe even 30, Mr. Speaker. But it's clearly an issue that as we look at this as time goes on, as I said, the role of the reserves is going to change. The role of our military has changed, and we need to reflect that in legislation. Most of that will be federal because they have responsibility for the Department of National Defense. But in those rare tangential moments in which our province has authority over something that can make it easier for our men and women who serve us in the Navy, Army, Air Force, Mr. Speaker, I'm glad to see that this is something that we can do. And as the role of the military changes, I'm also glad to see that this will ensure, for example, I know that at Shearwater, in my riding, they are now in the process of tendering for a center which will be the basis for the Rapid Deployment Force, which as well may involve many reservists, both at that actual base under certain conditions and times of emergency, but also, Mr. Speaker, in times in which they may be sent over. And the role of the military and the history of this province is clear. We all know it, but it's ongoing. And maybe 10 years ago, there was some discussion that maybe the role of the military in our province was going to be downsized. That has changed. I think all parties reflect that, both in the last election and currently, that our society has changed, the role of the military has changed. If Canada is to be taken seriously on the world stage with regard to its push for human rights, with regard for its push for good governance and democracy, we also have to, as a country, be prepared to play a role in the peacemaking that's involved in ensuring that we can do that. And whether that was in the Balkans 10 years ago, or whether that's in the stands now, or whether that may be some other part of the world 5 or 10 years from now, the role of the military, the role of our civil service, the role of individuals in our society in ensuring and promoting democracy and good governance for all in the world is something that's going to carry on. The reservists have an important role in doing that, Mr. Speaker. I'm glad to stand here and support them and ensure that this bill passes. Thank you.
The honourable member for Pictou-Heath on an introduction.
Mr. Speaker, it gives me great pleasure to rise to make an introduction. In the West Gallery, we have today Frank Fraser, a former mayor of the town of Canso, a long-time activist on numerous fronts, and the person who advanced democracy in this province by setting the stage for civil servants to run for public office. And I'm very proud to stand and present to the House Frank Fraser and ask that a warm round of applause be given to him.
A warm welcome to all our visitors visiting us this afternoon. I'll now recognize the Honourable Leader of the Opposition to close the debate.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rose just a short time ago to move second reading, and I'm now going to be wrapping up the speaking and and closing debate on second reading. And I wanted to just reflect for a second. I think I said this previously, that this was an important piece of legislation to us. I think, recognizes for us the importance that we place on the support of the military and the support of the men and women who volunteer to serve in the Canadian Armed Forces. And this has been a long history with the NDP, the support of military and military families. It predates, actually, the 1961 convention that founded the NDP. In fact, the involvement on military issues goes back to the end of the Second World War, when many of the returning soldiers coming back to Canada found that there were inadequate pensions, when those who had lost their lives overseas, the widows of those people realized that there were inadequate pensions for the widows of soldiers. It was the CCF in the House of Commons that argued and worked so hard to ensure that those people who offered to serve their country in the important theaters of war in Europe and in the Pacific had those sacrifices appropriately recognized by a grateful nation. So this is a matter of kind of long-standing commitment from this party and from the predecessors that in that political lineage, if I can use that appropriate expression, for the NDP. And so we saw this opportunity with this bill to find a way to help protect and to help recognize the service of reservists by ensuring that their employment was going to be protected, that they were going to have the opportunity to come home from that service. And let's remember that it's not just the service in other theaters in foreign countries, but also service in training aspects to bring up their skills so that they can be ready to serve in other capacities, to ensure that the benefits that they would enjoy if they had continuous service with their employers would not be jeopardized as a result of their service. All of this, I think, is an important way to recognize that commitment, but also to ensure that those people have the economic security they deserve when they come back to their families, when they come back to this province, Mr. Speaker. And I believe that it is the case in this province, as it is in many states in the United States and indeed in the provinces of this country, that when employers are looking for dedicated employees for their companies, one of the things that they look for are the extra employment activities that people have. You know, do they participate in their community? Do they serve in service organizations? Do they serve in the reserves? Because they see that commitment to these undertakings as an aspect of character development, as an aspect of commitment, as a positive thing that an employer should consider when they are hiring their potential employees. So this just goes further to strengthen the support that we think is due to reserve members of the Canadian Forces. It certainly, I believe, will be widely appreciated. And I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, that since I introduced this bill a short time ago, that I have received many emails from people in the Canadian Forces Reserves who have A, applauded the introduction of the bill, but B, also said, I can see how this is going to help me in my workplace. I'm often left trying to negotiate with my employer for time off. If there was a piece of legislation, I would have a better ability to be able to arrange for this important aspect of my commitment to my country and to my province. So I'm pleased that under these circumstances in a minority government that the majority party in the House would recognize a good idea when they see one and agree to act on it, Mr. Speaker. I mentioned earlier that in part this bill comes out of my own personal experience with the armed forces. Of course, I served in the Navy, and over that course of time, I had the great privilege to work with many people who were in the reserves. They served next to me on the bridge of the ships that I was posted to. I recognized and appreciated the work they do, and I think it's fortunate that years after that service has gone by that I'm now in a position to bring forward a piece of legislation that will have a positive effect on their service. I would make this final point, and it is a fact of life that as you go forward in your life, you take on new challenges, you do new things, and the people around you who you have associated throughout your lifetime are doing the same things. Well, many of the people that I served with in the armed forces went through, and it seems only yesterday, Mr. Speaker, it seems like, but it was in fact back in 1981 when I went through a basic training at CFB Chilliwack in Vedder Crossing in British Columbia. I had joined the Armed Forces at that time in the capacity of a program that was called Direct Entry Officer, DEO, which recognized my university training as an important aspect of officer qualifications. And the result of that was that I went through with many individuals who are now, Mr. Speaker, in senior positions in the armed forces and who are serving in senior capacities around the country and indeed around the world. So, Mr. Speaker, I continue to hear from those people. I continue to have contact with them and their families, and I can tell you that when I talk to them about legislation like this, they were very pleased to know that it was coming forward, and I think will be even more pleased to know that the government is recognizing the value of the Act. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I would close debate on Bill 80. Thank you.
Thank you. The motion is for second reading on Bill number 80. Is the House ready for the question? Question has been called. All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Those against, motion carried.
Bill 80, entitled An Act to Protect the Civilian Employment of Members of the Canadian Forces Reserves.
Or that this bill be referred to the Committee on Private and Local Bills. Law amendments? Law amendments. Apologize to the Committee on Law Amendments. The Honourable, the Liberal Leader on introduction.
Thank you very much, Speaker. We have with us today some representatives from ANSA who are here in the gallery, and I'd like to take the opportunity to introduce Zach Churchill, representing St. Mary's University, Spencer Keys, the Executive Director of ANSA, Mike Tipping of Dalhousie University, Graham Carter from St. FX, and Peter Erickson from Acadia. Speaker, we'll be meeting with these representatives later on this afternoon to discuss various issues facing university students here in our province, and I would ask our guests to rise and receive the warm welcome of the House.
Thank you. The Honourable, the Deputy Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to call Bill 78, Order of Nova Scotia Act.
Private Members' Public Bills, Bill number 78. The Honourable Member for Annapolis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to rise and speak on this bill for a few minutes, and I want to commend the member from Clare for bringing this bill forward. It's long overdue. I also want to recognize the foresight of the then Minister of Tourism, Culture and Heritage, and now the Premier of the day, for bringing this, the Order of Nova Scotia forward in 2001. I happen to be a fortunate Nova Scotian who is the child of a recipient of the 2005 Order of Nova Scotia, and I want to say to the House, I think I can speak for for her and I think on behalf of all recipients. It's not what their life was about, but it is a wonderful crowning to what they consider to be their work throughout trying to live the life as they see fit and to make accomplishments and make a difference for the people that they come in contact on a regular basis. So I want to say to the Premier today, well done in 2001, and I want to say to the member from Clare, this is a step in the right direction. We now are beginning to acknowledge the young men and women from the age group of 16 to 26 on their accomplishments that they have made to Nova Scotia. Under the present order of Nova Scotia, really, even though it doesn't stipulate it in the Act, it really has been recognizing a lifetime of accomplishments. Even though the Act doesn't stipulate that, that's really what we have been doing with the present order of Nova Scotia. And this amendment that will take place will recognize young Nova Scotians between the age of 16 and 26 who are making a tremendous contribution and making a difference in the lives of all Nova Scotians, Mr. Speaker. I want to say that what this will do, that this piece of legislation will change from the committee recognizing 5 Nova Scotians in a year to changing to where they will recognize 6. And one of those recipients will have to be between the ages of 16 and 26. And I want to just read what the objectives of the Order of Nova Scotia is, Mr. Speaker. It's in line item number 5 in the Order of Nova Scotia. It says the objective of the Order is to honor individual Nova Scotians who have distinguished themselves by an outstanding contribution to the cultural life or the social or economic well-being of the province, by an outstanding achievement or by excelling in any field of endeavor to the benefit of the people, the province, and everywhere. So, Mr. Speaker, I think as we look forward, this is just the proper evolution of this bill as we go forward. Now to begin to move it and recognize the young Nova Scotians who are doing that on a day-to-day basis. I think all of us can go through our ridings and are amazed by the tremendous things that young people are doing, how they are leading the way. I'm sure if we went around in this, all of us could pull out a name out of constituents of ours who are doing tremendous things of not only that are impacting on the local community that they live in, but the greater community and indeed the entire province. And this is one way for us to reach out and recognize one of them a year. Recognize one of them a year on the tremendous work that they have done. So, Mr. Speaker, I want to congratulate the member from Clare for bringing this forward, and I will sit and listen as other members have a chance to speak on this bill.
Thank you. The Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I'm only going to speak just for a moment. I want to echo the comments, some of the comments made by the former speaker, who indeed is the son of a very distinguished Nova Scotian, having received the Order of Nova Scotia, and certainly she's a great example of the type of individual in our province that should be recognized. And that's really what the Order of Nova Scotia has been all about. It's recognizing those distinguished individuals who have really set themselves apart by doing things which have positively impacted our province. And so, you know, the number of all the individuals who have received indeed deserve to have achieved an Order of Nova Scotia. And I was very pleased and proud to introduce the bill. Although, Mr. Speaker, I want to be very clear, it was my predecessor, John Ham, Premier Ham, who certainly put forward that idea, and we moved forward upon it. But I did have the pleasure of putting forward the bill. And I do think recognizing a young person between the ages of 16 and 25 is very important in addition to what we already do. And of course, I know you have an interest in that, Mr. Speaker, having put forward this bill. And, you know, and I think perhaps you have seen fit to do this because perhaps with your education background and perhaps seeing the young people in your community and the impact that they have made. I've seen the same thing, both in my classroom, in my community. So I'm certainly a supporter of what's being put forward, Mr. Speaker. I believe that we need to do more to promote what our young people are doing here in our province.
and do more to recognize Nova Scotians in a valuable manner. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The member for Halifax Citadel.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have to commend the member for Clare for bringing this bill forward, Mr. Speaker. We support it without any reservations. We think it is high time we started to pay more attention to recognizing the good thing the youth do in our community and spend less time complaining about some of their youthful failings. This bill intends to potentially increase the number of recipients from 5 to 6, and in that case, where it is raised to 6, the bill proposes that one of the candidates, or at least one of the candidates, I should say, must be a person under the age of 26. The bill also says 25 at one point, but I think the intent is to be under 26. I'm quite happy to support this, Mr. Speaker, because I think it's high time we spent more time focusing on the good things that our youth do. The object of the order is to honor individual Nova Scotians who have distinguished themselves by an outstanding contribution to the cultural life or the social or economic well-being of the province, by an outstanding achievement or by excelling in any field of endeavor to the benefit of the people of the province or elsewhere. And I went through the list of just the most recent recipients of the Order of Nova Scotia, Mr. Speaker, and I would like to put that on the record. Dr. Ron Stewart, as a health minister, organized the ambulance service, which has become one of the most highly regarded and respected ambulance services and paramedic training programs in the world. George Elliott Clark, a prominent Africadian from Hants County, a professor at the University of Toronto, a recognized playwright and poet and novelist and activist, winner of the Governor General's Award. Joan Dillon from St. FX, who's tutored young people on Mi'kmaq and African heritage issues. Cora DeYoung in saving some of our folk art. And Colonel Ian Fraser, who brought us the Royal Nova Scotia tattoo. And I'd be delighted to see someone under the age of 26 included in this category, Mr. Speaker, because I believe there are many Nova Scotian students who would be eligible, at least worthy of consideration. In fact, I see some of them in the gallery today. I see Zach Churchill and Mike Tipping and Spencer Keys and others. My eyesight fails me. And earlier today, we had Danielle Sampson and Chris Parsons here. You know, these student activists have been busy in the trenches and they've been fighting hard for post-secondary education. And I'm sure at some point they should be considered if they don't wish to stand now. And at one point, Mr. Speaker, I taught the member from Clare's son, who was a young activist on the St. Mary's campus. And he was one of the busiest young students around and an inspiration to all of us. So my point is that there are a great number of young Nova Scotians under the age of 26 who would be eligible and who do make an outstanding contribution to the well-being of our province. As someone who has coached soccer for a number of years, under 18 girls, who's someone who's taught at university for over 15 years, and who's someone who's very involved in the activist community, I can say that we've seen great numbers of young activists and students and scholars, generally who spend an awful lot of time trying to make their communities and their homes and their schools a better place. And it is time that we recognize them. And in particular, not to draw attention to any particular fields, but certainly at the Ecology Action Center, for example, Mr. Speaker, I'm amazed by the energy that those young activists bring to their cause with very little reward, and often they work under very difficult conditions. The bill doesn't refer to organizations, but I think the Order of Nova Scotia itself recognizes young organizations, and I think it should include reference to groups and associations like the Ecology Action Center, which is primarily, although not exclusively, youth-driven. Similarly, in the arts and culture, we see young artists and musicians struggling under difficult conditions, inventing new forms, and we should recognize them as well in the social justice field. So my point, Mr. Speaker, is yes, it wouldn't be very hard to find distinguished Nova Scotians under 26 who would be eligible for investiture in the Order of Nova Scotia. we commend the member from Clare for bringing this forward, and we're delighted to support it. It's high time we paid more attention to this issue. Thank you.
Thank you. I will now recognize the honourable member from Pictou Centre on introduction.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A few moments for introduction. Bring your attention to the East Gallery for a brief introduction. A couple fine ladies from Pictou County, two sisters of mine visiting the House of Assembly for the first time, Thelma and Joan Dunn. I ask you to stand for a round of applause.
Thank you. The Honourable, the Leader of the Liberal Party.
Thank you, Speaker, and I simply want to rise and say a few words on Bill 78, and I as well want to certainly commend my colleague from Clare for having brought forward this important change. Speaker, I think all of us, especially during Volunteer Week, have the occasion to attend volunteer banquets in our own ridings, and I think it's safe to say that for all of us, when you look around the rooms, unfortunately, there isn't very many young people at these volunteer banquets, and we realize in all of our communities that many of our volunteers are getting up in age. Many are starting to get burnt out, and we certainly have to work together to try to attract more and more young people to get involved in volunteer activities in their schools, in their communities, cultural activities, whatever it might be. And so I believe that any efforts that we can undertake in that regard are to be commended. So, Mr. Speaker, by adding one more position to the Order of Nova Scotia, I believe is a very prudent way to do so, because with this suggestion we are actually keeping the existing infrastructure in place that is there for the Order of Nova Scotia. So it's, I believe it's going to make it much easier for the government to be able to put this system in place, and I believe the comments we've heard from throughout the Assembly clearly reflect support from all parties for this initiative. Mr. Speaker, I know my colleague from Annapolis has mentioned his connection to one of the recipients a couple of years ago, that being his mother, Teresa McNeil. I also want to take this opportunity to recognize one of the first recipients of the Order of Nova Scotia, Mr. John Boudreau. John was recognized for his many years of hard work in community economic development, especially during the crisis when the collapse of the groundfish fishery took place. And I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, I think he's a good example, because John was not only recognized for his past accomplishments. I think by giving him the Order of Nova Scotia is very fitting, because it certainly sends the message that those being recognized haven't ended their work on behalf of the people of Nova Scotia. In many ways, they continue to do so. And in John's case, after receiving the Order of Nova Scotia, he ran for elected office in the municipal election, was successful, and I'm pleased to say a couple of weeks ago he was also successful in another election, that being the election for Warden of Richmond County, and he is now the new Warden of Richmond. So I think it's a sign that the Order of Nova Scotia committee has been very prudent in who they've selected, and I believe he's a shining example of not just recognizing a Nova Scotian for their past efforts, but certainly also recognizing that some of those recognized through the Order of Nova Scotia continue to give in many ways to our province and to their home community. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to see that this bill is getting the full support of the House, and look forward to it moving on to second reading and speedy passage in this House. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now recognize the honourable member from Annapolis to close debate on Bill number 78.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank all of the members of the House for their comments. I also want to say to the Premier, I neglected to recognize the former Premier, Dr. Ham, who I know was instrumental in this, in bringing this forward to Nova Scotia. So once again, Mr. Speaker, I just want to close debate on Bill number 78 and look forward to moving to law amendments.
Thank you. The motion is for second reading on Bill number 78. The House ready for the question? Question's been called. Would all those in favour of the motion please say aye. Those against, motion carried.
Bill 78, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 9 of the Acts of 2001, the Order of Nova Scotia Act.
Order that this bill be referred to the Committee on Law Amendments. The Honourable Deputy Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to call Bill 83, Labour Standards Code.
Private members, public bills, Bill number 83. The honourable member for Preston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's with great pleasure I stand to say a few words on this bill. This bill is reasonably straightforward. It ensures or entitles employees to at least a 30-minute break after 5 hours of consecutive work. Basically, today, with the demands on employees to produce more and more, I think that's very positive and will help improve productivity and at the same time give people the time to have their meal or to have a period of rest. So it's a bill that our caucus has been quite interested in for some time, and it's something that really had to be done to protect Nova Scotians. And with that, I'd be interested in hearing the comments from the other parties.
Thank you. The Honourable Minister of Environment and Labour.
Thank you very much. I want to thank the member opposite, the Honourable Member from Preston, for introducing Bill 83, a revision to the Labour Standards Codes that will provide employees with a guaranteed rest eating break. This bill, as you know, Mr. Speaker, will formally match the rights and protections afforded to other Nova Scotians who work in other provinces across Canada. And so it was good that the honourable member brought in this bill. We did have a very short stakeholder consultation. We received 35 responses to our request for public and stakeholder opinion from this, from employers, employees, unions, and the others. All respondents supported the general idea of meal breaks. They made suggestions, Mr. Speaker, regarding options for flexibility and highlighted situations that might require exceptions by employers or employees. All of these comments are valuable and are useful input as we move to the next stage of law amendments. So, Mr. Speaker, we will be proposing some amendments to the bill that would exempt urgent situations from the application of this bill, including at times workers who may be working by themselves and are extremely busy and unable to take advantage of this proposal. But with that small sort of proviso, I want to thank the honourable member for bringing this forward and for aligning Nova Scotia with the other provinces across Canada on rest breaks after 5 hours of work.
Thank you. The honourable member for Cole Harbour Eastern Passage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to commend the member from Preston for introducing a bill that brings this province kicking and screaming into the 1970s. The Labour Standards Code of this province was last fundamentally overhauled over 30 years ago. And for the last 7 years, this government in this House has sat or stood in this House and has refused to even consider significant changes. Any significant change that's been made to basic standards of work in this province have come from the opposition benches, either the Liberal Party or our party, Mr. Speaker, and I find that appalling. This is about a government that ignores minimum standards for the people of this province. Why, until today, do we have to talk about a province where it was illegal? You could fire, let me back up, you would fire a worker who decided to take a half-hour lunch break after 5 hours of work. Mr. Speaker, that is a shame. And this government has spent, and let's face it, for the last 30 years, the Tories have been in power all but I think maybe 8 of those years. And they have refused to make any changes to this legislation, and we all know why. Their buddies who are employers, their buddies in business, didn't want to see minimum standards increased in this province. It's only through minority government that we've actually been able to get some changes, piecemeal changes, to a bill that, frankly, if in 1999 they announced there was going to be a fundamental review of the Act, today we would be standing here talking about and debating a bill that would actually fundamentally overhaul labour standards in this province. Mr. Speaker, this is about standards that are reflected statutorily in every contract of employment in the province of Nova Scotia, with certain exceptions. And yet, this province has an abominable record of not only having poor standards, minimum standards, but also not enforcing those standards that they should be enforcing. And Mr. Speaker, that's a sin. Because frankly, in this day and age, we are in a position in this province that we should be reflecting the fact that we're going to be coming up on a labour shortage. Whether we like it or not, whether the employers in this province like it or not, and whether this government in its dying days like it or not, we're in a situation that between now and the next couple of years, as more and more workers leave this province to make $50 an hour in Fort McMurray or Calgary or Red Deer or Edmonton, you're going to begin to see, much like Adam Smith predicted 250 years ago, we're going to begin to see the invisible hand of the market force more higher standards, better pay for workers in this province because of a shortage of labor. And this government has their eyes and ears closed to this actually happening. And if we actually created in this province a minimum standards with regard to employment contracts, a labor standards code that reflected the fact that things have changed since 1972 or 1973, whenever we passed this act, maybe we'd be in a position where employers and workers could begin to talk about the conditions of employment that would ensure that we'd have minimum standards and that we'd ensure that the workers would be able to have a workplace that they could come to and work and ensure that they would have minimum pay, that they would have a lunch break. God forbid in this province that our people can't have a lunch break until the member from Preston introduces this bill. We talked in the past about actually having a couple of days off if your child was sick, something our party had to force this government to do. We've talked in the past about vacation time in this province. Things that are fundamental rights for most workers who have a collective agreement are things that in this province, this government has ignored time and time again. And Mr. Speaker, what's going to happen, whether they like it or not, is in the next couple of years, as more and more workers go out west, and frankly, we can talk about them going out west because of higher pay. But the fact is, one of the reasons they're going out west as well, I think intrinsically, is because there's a labor shortage. And with a labor shortage, Mr. Speaker, that means workers have the ability to define their standards and get better conditions, whether that's safety conditions, whether that's working conditions, whether that is better pay, whether that is, for example, per diems, depending on the type of work they're doing. These are the things they're able to get because there's a labor shortage out there. There's going to be a labor shortage here. Arguably, there's one now in Halifax. There's going to be a labor shortage in this province because so many people are going out west, Mr. Speaker, and this province isn't even ready, and this government is blind to the fact that this is what is going to happen. And one of the things we could do to keep workers here is enhance the minimum standards, so whether they're in a union or whether they're not, there will be minimum standards of an employment contract that will ensure that the workers of this province have the ability to get, as part of an employment contract, basic conditions. And I'm not saying people are moving to Fort McMurray because they can't get a lunch break here, but that is one of the straws on the back of the camel, Mr. Speaker, whether it's a lunch break, whether it is a minimum wage. Up until we got the government to force the government to change it, they couldn't even get decent overtime in this province. Slowly and surely, through piecemeal amendments, which I would argue, like in many acts, that's not the appropriate way to do it. We're getting changes to the labor standards code in this province because this government turns a blind eye to actually ensuring minimum standards for workers in this province, Mr. Speaker. That's the problem. That's what they've ignored for 7 long years. But thankfully, Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the member from Preston for introducing this. I'm glad to see the people of this province will be guaranteed a lunch break. What a great provision we have in this province now once this bill is passed. And in the dying days of this government, maybe we'll begin to get more changes that will result in a better labor standards code, Mr. Speaker, so that the people of Nova Scotia can have basic, decent standards at their workplace, and maybe a few of them will decide not to go out west because they can be here and they can get the minimum standards they need to continue to work here and enjoy a lifestyle. Thank you.
Thank you. Now recognize the honourable member from Preston to close debate on Bill number 83.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to hear the support from both parties on this important bill. As been stated, they'll give employees an opportunity to have a break and a rest period and possibly a lunch period if that's appropriate at the time. And I think it's a move forward in Nova Scotia to help Nova Scotians have a better workplace and to ensure that they have periods of rest and for the employers too, because it'll make the employees more productive. Everybody wins. This is no lose bill. And with that, I'd like to move second reading of Bill number 83, Labor Standards Code amendments.
Thank you. The motion is for second reading on Bill number 83. Question has been called. Would all those in favor of the motion please say aye? Aye. Those against, motion carried.
Bill 83, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 246 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Labor Standards Code, to provide employees with a rest or eating break.
or that this bill be referred to the Committee on Law Amendments. The Honourable the Deputy Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to call Bill 86, Motor Vehicle Act.
Bill number 86. The Honourable the Member for Preston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This revision to the Motor Vehicle Act is long overdue. It will allow and demand that people wear helmets when they're on basically any wheeled device, such as bikes or skateboards, anything that's wheeled and non-motorized. And it has been proven that the helmets have prevented 85% of head injuries and 88% of death due to head injury. So that's important. And the problem with a bill like this is, and hopefully it'll be supported and passed by the legislature and supported by the other parties, you know, you put a bill like this in place and over time, as the acceptance of the bill goes, more and more people wear helmets, and we will never know how many people are saved, either their lives or serious injury, because they've had a helmet on. And I think that's good news. This will help a lot of pain and suffering that's gone through with families and young people that have, particularly young people that have been injured with head injuries needlessly. And just to give you an example, there's over 500 Canadians hospitalized with head injuries from bike use each year. That's just bike use. And as skateboards and other things become more and more popular with their young people and with their adults in the area, it's important, I feel, that they're protected, and they are protected. And there's also each year, you know, there's 450 people or Nova Scotians die from preventable injuries each year. I mean, that's a staggering number. So anything we can do to prevent that or reduce that number is a bonus as far as I'm concerned. It makes it, you know, easier to, before with the law was in place, was sort of very ambiguous when the police officer was trying to protect somebody and ensure they were wearing a helmet, whether they could enforce it in this location or that location. This bill will eliminate that problem as well. And in short, it's really supported by a lot of people in the community, and it will help save lives and save injuries from people in the area. And with that, I'd be very interested in hearing the comments from the other parties, and hopefully they'll see be able to support this bill.
Thank you. The Honourable the Minister of Health Promotion and Protection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's my pleasure to rise in the House today in support of Bill number 86. I look at this as a bill to help make Nova Scotia a safer place. I know the member opposite has introduced similar legislation in the past. I believe it's never the wrong time to do the right thing, and that's why we need to move forward with this piece of legislation. I know that, Mr. Speaker, my staff have assisted with the development of this bill, and it's the kind of legislation that will help ensure that Nova Scotia becomes one of the healthiest and safest provinces in this country. As many members of this House are aware, injury is the leading cause of death and disability during the first 45 years of our life, and it kills more Nova Scotians between the age of 1 and 20 than all other causes combined. I want to read that again, Mr. Speaker. It kills more Nova Scotians between the age of 1 and 20 than all other causes combined. Mr. Speaker, given that injury takes its greatest toll on youth, it is a leading cause of potential years of lost life. The cost of injury in Nova Scotia is said to be $570 million per year, greater than the use of tobacco, obesity, or physical inactivity. Mr. Speaker, these costs are all avoidable. It has been proven that brain injuries can be reduced through the development of comprehensive policies and programs to encourage the use of helmet for certain recreational activities by up to 65%. Mr. Speaker, that is a powerful number. And if we think of that number as a number of our families and friends and loved ones who are affected when someone they know is injured in such a life-altering way, it creates yet another dimension to the cost and pain. Mr. Speaker, I believe this bill provides an ideal opportunity to revisit some of the positive steps and strides that we have made in injury prevention over the past few years. Of particular note, in 2003, our government
committed to develop a comprehensive injury prevention strategy. Mr. Speaker, in 2004, we induced that strategy, and we became the first province in the country to fund and lead such a strategy. In addition, Mr. Speaker, I must also reference the recent work on enhanced child safety through the use of booster seats. Positive steps such as these will translate directly into safer and healthier Nova Scotians. I believe that this is what we all want. Mr. Speaker, I must also applaud the work of our key stakeholders in the area of injury prevention, such as the Helmet Safety Awareness Coalition and Injury Free Nova Scotia. Groups such as these have ensured that the issue of injury prevention and its associated costs have stayed on the front burner of all parties in this House. Mr. Speaker, let me reiterate that I personally remain committed to the health and safety of all Nova Scotians. With my officials, we are acting on a daily basis to make this province the healthiest place to live, work, and play in Canada. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. The honourable member from Pictou West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm pleased to rise in support of Bill 86 and have a few minutes to speak on this important topic. And I certainly thank my colleague from Preston for bringing this forward. I guess the Act is officially called an Act to amend Chapter 293 of the Revised Statutes 1989 of the Motor Vehicle Act. And it's really all about, well, it's really about common sense, Mr. Speaker. It's about helmets and the use of them in this province, and as we know, it is legislated that they're mandatory on four-wheelers and on motorcycles and certainly on bicycles and other items or other recreational equipment. But they're not, as is pointed out, this bill is not province-wide. It's only at the present time on roads and highways and bicycle paths and on public streets or sidewalks. But of course, there's lots of places in this province that people travel on a bicycle or use a skateboard or inline skates or whatever that are not on these public roads or sidewalks or highways. And that's what this bill is designed to do. Why it wasn't originally put in the bill, I'm not sure. It certainly makes sense that anywhere a person is operating a non-motorized vehicle such as a bicycle or a scooter, skateboard, etc., then certainly there should be protection for the individuals that are using this equipment. And we certainly do want to prevent accidents. You know, it's a tragedy anytime somebody's injured or an accident occurs. Even worse, death. You know, the loss of a loved one on a bicycle or on a inline skate or skateboard. It doesn't happen too often, but it happens. I guess too often. Once is too often. And if anybody is injured or killed on any of these recreational equipment. You know, I think we've all heard of accidents in Nova Scotia and certainly in other jurisdictions where people have been injured, people have been even killed on a bicycle or other piece of recreational equipment. And so it makes sense whether it's on a private lane or a private driveway, perhaps at a playground, anywhere that people are operating this equipment. A lot of people mountain bike these days, and over hill and dale, and you know, through some pretty rough terrain. Again, that's outside the present law, and to me, it makes sense that they should be wearing a helmet on these trails. And there's a lot of organized mountain biking going on in Nova Scotia now, and absolutely, I think they should be protected for their own protection and for their loved ones. I want to see them come back safely home before the day is out. I know one trail in my county, Mr. Speaker, that's well used for mountain bikes is the Fitzpatrick Mountain Trail. It's near Scottsburn, Millsville, and it's about 8 kilometers long, and it's used quite extensively by bikers and for recreational opportunities. So again, this bill would allow protection for people out using trails such as that. I guess the only concern I might have, Mr. Speaker, about the bill is how it's going to be enforced. You know, it is a common sense thing to protect yourself and to and to see other people use it off highway or off the areas that are presently covered. But I suppose that, Mr. Speaker, it'll probably come down to education, to let people know that this is the right thing. It's for your own protection. It's for protection of others. And so I don't know if it is enforceable on the back 40 or out on a remote mountain trail, but it's perhaps education in time it'll become a standard thing. And just like wearing a seatbelt in your car or putting a helmet on if you're wearing a four-wheeler, then it'll fall into place on its own. So overall, Mr. Speaker, I certainly support this particular bill. I thank my colleague for bringing it forward, and I look forward to seeing what other colleagues may have to say on it and see how it proceeds through law amendments. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. I'll recognize the honourable member from Hanseath on an introduction. I apologize. Okay. The honourable member for Hanseath.
And I appreciate the opportunity to speak to this bill this afternoon, which updates and amends what the government's already been doing to improve safety across this province for the people who use active modes of transportation, roller skates or inline skates, I guess now they're referred to, bicycles and skateboards. We all know, or at least I hope we know by now, the safety that helmets provide, not only to adults but to our youth. And with adults wearing these helmets, the impact they can have on our youth, and hopefully keep them wearing them. So it's important for our government to update these helmet regulations. Then, as the standards has changed over the years and with the growing popularity of these devices, I mentioned a moment ago, particularly among the youth, and the skateboarding seems to be at least the biggest in my area. By qualifying these existing safety regulations, this amendment will make it easier for everyone to understand the law and minimize the gray areas. It's common sense to recognize that it's not on sidewalks alone where these devices are used, especially as we create more recreation spaces for these devices to be used, Mr. Speaker. The original intent, I think, of this legislation was not intended for them to protect people involved in stunts and competitions, and this amendment is no different. The amendment adds to the existing regulations or on any property where such riding or operation is permitted. While head traumas are relatively low in this province, they have happened and continue, unfortunately, to happen. The long-term effects can be devastating. Anyone who has seen the effects of a head or a brain injury knows full well the importance of ensuring that our children and our adults are well protected when engaged in recreational activities. Brain injuries are, of course, the leading type of fatal and disabling injury to bicyclists and others who use devices such as skateboards and scooters and inline skates. In 2001, Julian Young, coordinator of injury prevention for Nova Scotia Health Promotion, was involved in a relatively minor bike crash. During this incident, he struck his helmeted head on an asphalt road while traveling approximately 25 kilometers an hour. Following that crash, Mr. Young was taken by ambulance to Colchester Regional Hospital, where he spent about 8 hours receiving treatment in the emergency department, including a CAT scan of his head. As a result of this minor crash, in which case his head was protected by a helmet, Young still suffered a concussion, which lasted 5 days, causing him to miss work for a week. Had Young not been wearing the right proper helmet, he likely would have been killed or suffered a severe brain injury. This is only one example of many where lives have been saved by a bike helmet, Mr. Speaker. Anyone who still does not adhere to the law are putting their own lives at risk, perhaps even the lives of others. And we hope our adults continue to set a good example for the younger members of our society. If our children and our youth see their parents, their neighbors, and their relatives observing the law, the greater the chances their children will adopt these safety measures. Mr. Speaker, it's an ongoing education issue as well as one of enforcement, which our government has a proven track record to raise awareness on this issue because it needs a heightened public awareness on a regular basis. Our government has traditionally partnered up with enforcement agencies and groups such as Nova Scotia Safety Council to get those messages across, as well as our own Department of Health Promotion and Protection. All of my daughters have bicycles, Mr. Speaker, and they've read the bicycle booklet, which is available on the government website, which I also believe was presented to them in their schools. It bears reminding to read the manufacturer's instruction and consult with sales staff when you buy a helmet. Staff will make sure that you get a helmet and one that fits correctly, most importantly. And we've issued and continue to issue public safety campaigns and publications which outline helpful instructions and details about, for example, how to properly wear a helmet and how to properly fit it. Helmets greatly reduces the risk of brain injuries by as much as 88%. This time last year, the Department of Health Promotion and Protection got the media involved in another way by getting the Chronicle Herald on board to not publish any photos of people using these devices unless they were wearing the proper helmet. And I will certainly be encouraging our local media in Hants County, the Hants Journal and the Valley Today, to adopt a similar rule. And it's a great way for the media to step up and set a good example. Preventable injuries, we talked about those. Approximately 450 lives each year. And the cost of the province is almost $6 million, as we've heard, annually in direct and indirect costs. It's the leading cause of preventable death from people aged 1 year to 45 years, which the last time I checked was still middle-aged. This amendment helps to better clarify the law that currently exists, especially as our government has been actively encouraging increased use of active modes of transportation by people of all ages. Encouraging our kids to build physical activity into their lives enhances healthy growth and can help them achieve and or maintain a healthy weight. There are many other benefits to encouraging our children to pursue the recreation activity that they enjoy. There are also social and personal benefits, such as helping to make friends, improving physical self-esteem, and increasing relaxation. These are habits that can have a positive effect over the lifetime that will help keep them in good health. Provided they pursue recreational activities safely and in areas they are permitted to operate active modes of transportation, they use to do so in safe and accessible physical environments. This is one more step that our government is taking to make sure the roads in these areas where these devices are permitted and the people who use them are safer. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. The honourable member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to stand here this afternoon and talk about Bill 86. I won't be speaking for a great length of time on this, Mr. Speaker, but I did want to stand up and speak to Bill 86. Mr. Speaker, this actually is a bill that is just catching up on something that should have been in the first piece of legislation. And the use of helmets for activities such as biking, skateboarding, inline skates, roller skates, all of these things should have been mandatory from the get-go. But what's happened now, Mr. Speaker, is that we've got a whole group of youth right now in a certain age group that have grown up not having to use those helmets in certain parts of their daily activities. And so I do believe, sure, we're moving in the right direction, and that as younger children use these pieces of equipment, that indeed they will be used to using a helmet no matter where they are when they're using these. But I do have a concern as to how this bill will actually be enforced. We know right now that our police departments are overburdened. We don't have enough police officers in the province to deal with the high amount of crime we have. We've got some of the highest crime rates here in HRM. We've got things happening all over the province. And if we don't have the police force right now to police criminal activity, then I'm just wondering how we're going to enforce children from wearing or not. We're going to enforce them, make sure they're wearing these helmets, because number one, you have to catch these teenagers without the helmets on. So it's sort of like, it's similar to the, youth shouldn't smoke, you can't sell them cigarettes, but how do you enforce it when you do see them smoking them? It's kind of a hard thing to enforce. So indeed, people, there's a certain group of us and our children that have grown up having to use seat belts, and when you just fall in line with that, sure, it's an easy thing. The same as car seats, and we're seeing the use of car seats for another group of children that didn't have to use them before. But I think I just heard yesterday in here that the government is hiring on another 100 and something police officers, and I think it's one for every police force in the province, some such number. But I believe there was a promise during the election campaign to bring on 200 more police officers. So again, the enforcement thing. We all know that teenagers are obstinate. They have an indestructible attitude. They don't believe that they can come to any harm, and they're going to be hard to buckle down and put on these helmets, I can guarantee you. I have 3 sons, and they've done all of these things: biking, skateboarding, rollerblading, you name it, they've done it. And I can tell you there's lots of times they haven't worn their helmet. So we'll see if this is going to work or not. Hopefully, you know, they'll put their helmets on. Certainly, we heard the Minister of Health Promotion stand up and talk about, I think he was talking about brain injury. And I'm not sure if I heard him correctly, but I think he said that there was $570 million worth of hospitalization costs. Maybe that's what he was saying this year or last year. But I'm not sure if he was saying those were all caused by skateboarding, inline, you know, those. He didn't actually mention how those injuries had happened, so I'm not sure on those numbers. But certainly the Office of Health Promotion has a piece to play in this, and the piece they can play is in educating our young children in grade primary when they start to use these pieces of equipment for physical activity. And we all know that we've got children now that are becoming diabetic. We've got childhood obesity. We've got kids that are getting into trouble because they simply do not have anything to do after school. Not all parents can afford to put their children in after-school programs. And thank goodness we have the Boys and Girls Clubs across the province that help us deal with those issues. But the Department of Health Promotion, and that is a fairly new department, should take this as an opportunity to educate our children on the proper use of helmet gear. And that, you know, helmets have to fit you in a certain way or they're totally useless, Mr. Speaker. If you don't have the proper fitting on your helmet and the right size for you, then you might as well not be wearing a helmet. The Office of Health Promotion can be doing something else too. They can be helping us in providing some kind of funding or maybe interest-free loans to communities that maybe want to build skate parks. I mean, I had parents ask me a couple of weeks ago when I was just at a social function, what can we do to get a skateboarding facility outdoor in Dartmouth East? And I said, well, the same way I think that most communities have got them is through getting a group of parents together, and really going out and maybe doing some fundraising first. You've got to get in touch with HRM. You've got to, you know, I told them, I said, phone the Office of Health Promotion. Like, you got to get a group of parents together, and then you have to find where you're going to get the pots of money to make this happen. And even if you form a committee and do that. But it seems to me that what it's come down to in this province is that a lot of things are just, you know, if you don't have a group of parents that have the time on their hands to really be able to put time and effort into community organization and trying to get things done in their community, then it just simply doesn't happen. And, you know, we've seen in Dartmouth East, you know, if we're talking about Bill 86 and we're talking about keeping children safe, and we're talking about health promotion and using these pieces of equipment to keep our youth and our children healthy, then, you know, we've just seen in my neighborhood a rink being closed. Well, where are those people going to go now to do their skating and what have you? So, you know, we're closing things down. We should be opening things up. We should be opening up more skate parks. I mean, this is something that is a very popular outdoor activity for children. It's got them outdoors, it's got them being active, and you can spend any amount of money on a skateboard, Mr. Speaker. I don't know if you've ever purchased one, but you can go to Pro Skates in Halifax, and you can spend literally hundreds and hundreds of dollars on a skateboard. You can, you know, you get the wheels, you get the trucks. Those are the things that you attach the wheels to. And there's all these, there's this whole sort of group that's built around skateboarding. Really, in HRM, it's quite a phenomenon. And I know Pro Skates has worked hard to get the skateboarding rink, outdoor skate park in the Commons. And I would guess that if Pro Skates hadn't have been there, that may never have happened, because they really went after that. So I think, you know, it's a good thing. It's an activity for our youth and our children, and I'd like to see some, you know, some skate parks being built around the province, and specifically in Dartmouth East. So maybe in the future I might be contacting the Minister of Health Promotion and looking for his help on trying to get a skate park in Dartmouth East. But it's not a bad bill. It's just something that should have been done a while ago. Don't know why it wasn't, but I do have some concerns on how we're going to enforce it. If we don't have the police now to enforce the crimes that are going on, I don't know how we're really going to enforce it. But with that, Mr. Speaker, I will take my seat. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Queens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise here in support of this bill that amends the Motor Vehicle Act, requiring the wearing of helmets. You know, this is very important. I mean, you know, we so much support safety of our young people and our adults, while at the same time we support and encourage good physical recreational activities, and safety is the utmost important factor when one is engaging in sports, and especially sports that have more of a rigorous aspect to that particular activity. I think as adults, we have adults in government, we have a clear role to play, and that's one in which we need to set examples. We need to be educating ourselves. We need to be demonstrating that we also practice safety measures when we are out engaging in sports. You know, we need to promote the wearing of helmets for our youth as something as cool, as being the in thing to do, as we need to be promoting helmets as, you know, the latest fashion statement to really make it, well, maybe I'm pushing it, but, you know, I'm a firm believer in reverse psychology. And with our young people, I mean, I know I've heard kids say, oh, what a sucky thing to do. I have to wear a helmet, and are you gonna, it's not cool. And helmets, I mean, we all can agree, you know, they're not the greatest looking hat a person can wear. But, well, yeah, and I really do think that we have a responsibility to kind of, you know, put that message out there that this is a good thing. Not only is it safe, not only is it the right thing to do to ensure safety of our young people, but also it's a very cool and in thing to do. So I'm hoping as we move forward with this and with the assistance of the Department of Health Promotion and Protection, that we can move forward some really good, strong, clear educational messages that we can ensure that young people actually pick up wearing a helmet with little or no problem. I do think that enforcement is going to be a concern. You know, how is that going to roll out? Who is going to be responsible? Is it going to be solely the responsibility of the local police forces or local RCMP agencies? Are we going to be having kind of watchdogs on the school grounds or watchdogs in the playground? I'm not sure what that enforcement looks like. But again, if we're delivering the right message out there, if we start promoting this in a big way, then perhaps enforcement won't be as big of an issue in the long run. So while I fully support this is the right thing to do. I mean, years ago, I remember riding my bike. It was a banana bike at the time and had the big handlebars, and sometimes we would double ride them, and we'd go for miles, and we'd have no helmets on. And the strawberry, no, I don't know if I had a strawberry shortcake bike, but but, you know, or we'd swing from trees with no helmets, or, you know, we'd be, I could never wear roller skates, but, you know, we didn't have much thought about our own safety. But, you know, certainly now, as sport, more aggressive sport becomes, it is part of our recreational activities. It's certainly part of our young people's daily activities. And we recognize over the years that we have had far too many incidences where young people and adults have been severely injured without having the proper safety equipment. So this is one more piece of the puzzle. This is one more amendment that strengthens the already existing regulations around wearing helmets. While I stand here, I think it's important too that we move forward in creating environments for young people to be sharing in these activities. I know in my own area, several years back, there was an attempt to build a skateboard park in the county, in the town of Liverpool, and it just didn't work out. I mean, certainly the youth supported that endeavor, parents supported that endeavor, but unfortunately, the funding wasn't there to see that move forward. There was certainly some concern that accidents would happen. Helmets weren't part of that strategy, and certainly the liability issues around having a public skate park and not having the necessary pieces to go along with that, that being the safety equipment that children and youth would be required to wear. It wasn't part of our regulations. So it did fall through the cracks, and that's unfortunate because I think we need to move forward in making sure that we invest in recreational facilities and playgrounds, and whether they be skate parks or skating rinks, or bicycle paths in our community. I think it's very important that we do move forward and invest in those strategies. I mean, if we're putting these regulations in place for youth to be safe, we want them to have good, safe places to be experiencing these great recreational activities. And I really hope that children still, climb the odd tree and really enjoy the healthy lifestyle that recreational facility or recreational activities provide them. Again, I support this bill, and my message would be to let's educate our youth, let's get the message out there that helmets are cool and a good thing to wear. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Sackville-Cobequid.
Thank you, Speaker. I'll just have a few words on this bill, and I want to thank the member from Preston for bringing this forward, and government for finally bringing this forward. I know it's been well over a year that this piece of legislation was first introduced by the member from Preston, and government didn't call it then and went through several sessions, I believe, and finally they've realized the importance of a good piece of legislation, Mr. Speaker. No matter what side of the political team you're on, Mr. Speaker, when good legislation comes forward, government needs to recognize it and promote it, Mr. Speaker. And I know this piece of legislation is supported by many organizations, many groups in this province, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to mention a few of them. I know that BIANS, the Brain Injury Association of Nova Scotia, was instrumental in trying to push for changes to this act to include stronger restrictions on the use of helmets, Mr. Speaker. And I've personally have worked over the years as a paramedic with BIANS in some of the programs that they provide Nova Scotians, like one that I worked with them on, Mr. Speaker, was around the proper fitting of helmets for our children, Mr. Speaker, and having the ability for parents and children to come to, we were in this case, Mr. Speaker, in the mall to get the proper fitting on helmets. And I know that the paramedics as this province have supported that initiative and would support this piece of legislation. You know, I've seen personally, Mr. Speaker, the results of head injuries, especially when, you see our children with these head injuries, Mr. Speaker, and they're preventable. And, I've seen and been witness to horrific accidents, Mr. Speaker, in this province from individuals and have seen them walk away without severe injuries, Mr. Speaker. So the use of helmets is important, not only on motorized vehicles, Mr. Speaker, but on these type of vehicles, Mr. Speaker, especially on bicycles, on the scooters. I mean, so often now we see changes in the devices that children are using for recreation, and it's important that government recognize the need to change legislation that applies to safety, Mr. Speaker. So with that, it's good to see that this piece of legislation is coming through and is being called today in hopes to prevent even one injury, Mr. Speaker, to a Nova Scotian, especially to the children of our province, Mr. Speaker. I think it's well worth it, and I will be supporting this piece of legislation. Thank you.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Oh, I had to take the opportunity, thank you, Mr. Speaker, to just say a few minutes on this piece of legislation. And the issue of using helmets, especially bicycles and other recreational items. Mr. Speaker, I've been wearing a helmet on my bicycle probably for 20 years now when I first came to Halifax University. It's hard to believe that a guy in my frame rides a bike, and you know, to the member opposite that seems to be making funny comments, he tries. I know he does, Mr. Speaker. But ultimately, for some time now, I've been wearing a helmet, and on 2 occasions now, I got to say that 3 occasions that helmet has served me very well. And Mr. Speaker, I remember one time when I was going to college in Ontario, and I had the opportunity to ride my bike down to the beach, which is about 20 clicks down the road, and coming to a railway crossing. And the railway crossing, instead of doing the 90 degrees across the road, was one of those 45-degree angles. And I remember really not paying so much attention to it, but the next thing you know is that I was on the ground with my helmet whacking the ground. So I know that instant that helmet came in handy for me. And I know just a few weeks ago, I was riding my mountain bike with my young son, and of course he's probably a better mountain biker than I am now. Andre is moving along quite well and getting very fast on his bike, and so his old man was trying to follow him along, and we were just going up a hill, up a hill. I tell you, there was some heavy breathing there, Mr. Speaker, I can say. And I got to say, no, I was riding the bike, and I had invested not that long ago in some clips for my bike, and really not too sure how to get my feet out of them. And so anyway, as we came to the stop, the bike came to a stop, and I put the wrong foot down, and of course I went down again. And once again, the helmet came in handy. So, Mr. Speaker, what I'm really trying to say is that all folks should be wearing their helmets when they're riding their bikes, including on their skateboards, rollerblades, and all types of vehicles and recreational vehicles like that, because they do help out, and they do keep a lot of children and a lot of folks out of our emergency rooms across Canada and across Nova Scotia. So, Mr. Speaker, with that, I want to thank the member opposite for bringing this to the floor of the legislature for discussion.
I recognize the Honourable Member for Preston to be closed debate on Bill number 86. The Honourable Member for Preston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I appreciate the comments from my honoured colleagues and on both sides of the floor. This is a very important bill, and as I said earlier, and it's been already said here by almost every member, if this can be implemented as soon as possible, hopefully that the legislature will pass it. And again, as I said earlier, we'll never know how many people's lives haven't been changed because they haven't got a head injury. But if we can just save one person from having a serious head injury, this law is worth it. They talked about, some people talked about enforcement. I think enforcement is partly education, but most of the people typically will follow the law, and they'll ensure that their children wear helmets when they go out, at least when they leave the house, so at least that's a step in the right direction. And if that can happen, and over time, it's those seat belts. I can remember the seatbelt debate, and I'm old enough to remember that, but there was the Honourable Minister of Health is probably old enough too, but he won't admit it. But I can remember the debate, and there was one, was a commissioner actually at the time that said he would never wear a seatbelt, and probably wearing the seatbelt today, and the number of lives that has saved, and the number of miserable things that have happened to families because of car accidents and other accidents, and over time that has indeed been a positive thing for all Nova Scotians. So I look forward to this going to the review, the next step of the bill, and hearing input from the community and people in the community as to what their thoughts are on it. But just before I sit down, I'd like to thank Mr. Joe Lively from my riding who actually brought this to my attention, and I said this to the media before, but oftentimes as politicians, people in the community feel that when they call a politician, nothing happens. And it's nice to see that someone brought this forward to my attention, and the honorable members and the legislature here see the wisdom of this act, and the department was very cooperative and helped change the wording on the act to make it better. And I think it's a testament to all the members here. The members here are really here for one reason, is to help Nova Scotians, and it's nice to see a Nova Scotian come forward with an idea, and hopefully this will go through the legislature and be made into law and indeed help some people from injury and the suffering that goes with it. Thank you very much.
The motion is for second reading of Bill number 86, the Motor Vehicle Act. Is the House ready for the question? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Contrary, nay. Motion is carried.
Bill number 86, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 293 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Motor Vehicle Act.
Ordered that this bill be referred to the Committee on Law Amendments. The Honourable Deputy Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to call public bills for second reading.
Public bills for second reading.
I'd like to call Bill 107, Midwifery Act.
Bill 107, the Midwifery Act. The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and it's I'm very pleased today to move this bill for second reading. Midwives are trained specialists who care for women throughout their pregnancy. They assist mothers and babies through low-risk births and, of course, through the following weeks. They will help provide support to the healthcare system by working with family physicians and nurses and other primary health providers in delivering care to moms and families across Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, midwives in Nova Scotia are currently practicing outside of a legislative mandate and are not integrated into the overall healthcare delivery system. Mr. Speaker, we had them in the House, of course, yesterday at the introduction of this bill, and there are about 16 midwives practicing across Nova Scotia, of course, outside this legislative mandate, and we did want to provide them with a piece of legislation and some regulations that they could work with within the healthcare delivery system. We have accepted recommendations from the Primary Maternity Care Working Group to help legislate these midwives in Nova Scotia. Pregnancy and childbirth are natural processes, and accessibility to primary maternity care is vital to healthy communities. And Mr. Speaker, many of us have had the pleasure of having children. I say that because I'm a guy. I'm sure women would probably say something a little different through their pregnancies. But I can say that I was there to provide a helping hand when I could to my dear wife through the two pregnancies of our children. But I can say that maybe with some extra help, including a guidebook for children, probably would have come in handy too. Pregnancy and I said that providing the right healthcare services in communities across Nova Scotia is important, and we want to have health teams of professionals and providers working communities supporting moms and families. And we know that midwives can be key team players, collaborating with team members, including family physicians and nurses, ensuring that moms and families get the timely access to maternity care. Adding midwives to our teams of healthcare professionals allow us to better meet the needs of moms and families across Nova Scotia. This act will allow midwives to work to their full scope of their practice, as they do in other provinces and territories across Canada where they are legislated. This act will also ensure a consistent standard of care for all midwives working throughout Nova Scotia. Unlike other provinces and territories throughout Canada, we've been able to include an option in this act that allows midwives to work in research and policy development. Today is a first step. Adding midwives to our teams of healthcare professionals will allow us to better meet the needs of moms and families across Nova Scotia. We are very pleased to be the 7th province in Canada and the first in Atlantic Canada to introduce midwifery legislation. Of course, Mr. Speaker, this is a first step to get this legislative mandate. Of course, this would cause the creation of a council, and that council, as the Act stipulates, would include a number of healthcare professionals, including RN, including physicians, that would work towards the regs and policies that would govern the day-to-day operation or day-to-days of the midwives. And again, Mr. Speaker, I can say as a parent, I know that this type of professional would have helped out our family through our processes, through pregnancies, and of course, again, after pregnancy, when first-time moms and first-time dads go home with babies, it's definitely a challenge, and to have that kind of support to follow them along would be a wonderful addition to our healthcare system. So Mr. Speaker, with those quick words, I again move second reading of the Midwifery Act.
The honourable member for Sackville-Cobequid.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's definitely a privilege to stand and speak on this piece of legislation revolving around the, I think, important profession of midwives and the profession of midwifery here in Nova Scotia, Mr. Speaker. This isn't something new to our province. I want to make it very clear that the midwives that are currently practicing in Nova Scotia have been doing so for a very long time, Mr. Speaker, well before, I think, the system that we have and enjoy today. Mostly, I would say, and I could be wrong, but mostly women. I don't know if there's any males in the profession. I don't believe any in Nova Scotia. Anyways, Mr. Speaker, for centuries have been performing the duties of assisting in childbirth here in our province, Mr. Speaker, and across the country. What I want to also state, Mr. Speaker, this is long overdue. This is something that the midwives have been asking for from government for well over 2 decades, Mr. Speaker. Over 23 years they've worked and tried to promote the fact that they need to be recognized in this province. I was talking to one midwife who said she can't count the number of health ministers that she spoke to over the last 23 years to try to get to this step today, Mr. Speaker. And it's long overdue, and I think government needs to recognize that they should have done this a long time ago, Mr. Speaker. This government's had well over 7 years to do this, and finally they're choosing to bring this forward, Mr. Speaker. 7 years they've been in government, and over the 23 years they've had many opportunities to bring this forward. So I wanted to make that very clear, Mr. Speaker. This has been long overdue, and we've needed to recognize the women in our province who have been working and helping pregnancy and delivery of children in this province for many years, Mr. Speaker. So it's important to recognize that they need to be recognized as an important component of the healthcare system here in Nova Scotia and recognize the duties that they do, Mr. Speaker. And as the Minister of Health said, this is a first step. And it is a first step, and I could see the joy on the faces of many of them that were in the Red Chamber yesterday when the Minister stated that he would introduce this piece of legislation yesterday, Mr. Speaker. They were very happy. And I know that speaking with many of them, there's a lot of concern revolving the next steps, Mr. Speaker, the steps that will follow after, hopefully, the passing of this piece of legislation, Mr. Speaker. And I have to say, the midwives and their organization is putting a lot of faith in the process that's going to occur after this piece of legislation passes, Mr. Speaker. There's a lot of work to be done. There's a lot of things that need to be worked out and looked upon in the creation of regulations that will support the profession of midwives and midwifery here in Nova Scotia, Mr. Speaker. And currently in the province, Mr. Speaker, they are not integrated in the healthcare system. Midwives, Mr. Speaker. They're not funded within Nova Scotia, Mr. Speaker. They charge a private fee currently to any residents or any Nova Scotians who want the assistance of a midwife during their pregnancy or during the delivery, Mr. Speaker. They do not have hospital privileges, Mr. Speaker, currently in the system. And these are individuals that have been practicing for many years, Mr. Speaker. They don't have the capacity to order routine prenatal testing or even an ultrasound, Mr. Speaker, in the province today, which I think needs to be recognized, that the current situation that we have is unacceptable. And you know, it's, as I said earlier, it's long overdue that we recognize the work they do and the contribution they can have during the prenatal stage and during a pregnancy for a woman here in Nova Scotia, Mr. Speaker. We all know that there's a shortage of physicians and professionals that deal with delivery now, Mr. Speaker, in our province. Not only in the more populated areas, Mr. Speaker, but especially in the rural communities here in Nova Scotia. They are really suffering the shortage of trained professionals to help in delivery, in the prenatal aspect of pregnancy, Mr. Speaker, and that post-delivery time where someone who is trained as a midwife could contribute and hopefully help in any problems or any care that is needed directly after delivery, Mr. Speaker. So we need to recognize that the regulations are important. This next step, the next step in this process is very important for the profession, that we recognize what they do and create the regulations to hopefully give the scope of practice that the midwives are looking for, Mr. Speaker. They're putting a lot of faith in not only government but in the other professions in health, like the College of Physicians and Surgeons, the Doctors Nova Scotia, Mr. Speaker, the College of Nurses, Mr. Speaker. They are going to look towards them to hopefully support the scope of practice that should be given to midwives here in this province. And we need to look across the country. We have many provinces in Canada, Mr. Speaker, that recognize and have legislation that regulates midwifery and the midwives that practice in their provinces, Mr. Speaker. We have British Columbia, Quebec, Ontario, Northwest Territories, Manitoba, Mr. Speaker. I think we're the 7th province that will introduce legislation like this, and also Alberta, Mr. Speaker, who recognize it. But I want to make it very clear to this government the importance of those next steps and the importance of one thing that astonished me yesterday, the importance of recognizing the need to cover the services provided by midwives in the future, Mr. Speaker. I was astonished yesterday during the briefing that the minister attended with members from the Midwife Association, and actually a midwife herself, a practicing midwife, was there, Mr. Speaker. And when the media asked the Minister of Health around coverage for this, Mr. Speaker, coverage for the procedures that will cover midwives in the practice of midwifery in this province, the Minister of Health said, well, we're not sure if that's going to be covered. We haven't got there yet. And he not only said that once, Mr. Speaker, he said it twice when he was asked twice. And that really astonished me, Mr. Speaker, and somewhat disappointed. I was disappointed in that response, Mr. Speaker. Here we are trying to do what we can to improve the healthcare system in this province. And we've heard time and time again from this government around the private flair, and I know the minister, he enjoys us bringing up some of the comments he's made, but the private flair to healthcare delivery in this province, that everything is on the table when it comes to healthcare in this province, and that dealing with possibility of private delivery, that the potential is endless, Mr. Speaker. And I would think and would hope that this government, and I hope the Minister of Health will state this quite soon, that in this process, in the formation of regulations, that the profession of midwifery and the job that midwives will do in this province will be covered under the public system, Mr. Speaker. They need that to happen. In the same comments, or at the same time the minister made the comments yesterday around not sure if we're going to cover it yet, we haven't got to that point yet, the lady on the end who was a practicing midwife stated that it was imperative that this be covered under the public system, Mr. Speaker, imperative, because there's one province in this country, Mr. Speaker, that doesn't cover this, and that is the province of Alberta. All the other provinces cover it under their MSI or under their public health care system, Mr. Speaker. And she said that because of Alberta's decision not to cover this, that it hurt that profession for many years in Alberta. It hurt it many years, Mr. Speaker. She did say, though, recently there is an increase in the use in Alberta, but it's just because of the economic boom there, Mr. Speaker. She said that people can afford it now and are actually paying for it in Alberta, Mr. Speaker. But she also said that the province of Alberta is currently looking at changing that, and in the near future will cover the cost of that discipline in healthcare under the public system, Mr. Speaker. So I hope the minister understands the importance of that and the importance of covering this service, because midwives are going to be an integral part of the healthcare delivery system here, the primary care delivery system for pregnancy, Mr. Speaker. In this legislation, it talks around, and hopefully in the creation of the regulations, how they'll work under the DHAs of this province. They'll work in collaboration with physicians, with specialists, Mr. Speaker, with other healthcare providers like nurses and other disciplines, Mr. Speaker, to work as a team. And that's the focus, and that's the goal for the midwives and midwifery here in the province, is to work as a team and as part of that team when it comes to prenatal, Mr. Speaker. And I hope the minister understands that. I'm going to repeat it again, that if this government chooses to go down that road of private delivery here in the province, this is an aspect, or this is an area that they don't need to go down when we're talking around midwives. And the Minister of Health says fear-mongering. Well, I'm not fear-mongering, Mr. Speaker. The minister could stop this right now. I would sit down and let him say that he will cover this, Mr. Speaker. The minister can stop the insecurities that many Nova Scotians have by opening up and telling us what this government's going to do to support and promote the public health care system in this province. But this minister refuses to do that. I think he continues to go down that road that Nova Scotians don't want to go down and Canadians don't want